All right. We're about to be joined Dr. John Lott, for Crime Prevention Research Center, crimeresearch.org. He's about to join us this morning, and we're getting ready to jump on board to talk about his last article. I've been wanting to talk to him about this for a couple weeks from Real Clear Investigations, talking about selective statistics and what it does to the crime debate. And he's got a really great in-depth article about this, and we're going to chat with him about that here in just a hot second. I'll post up the link here in the chat room, and for you guys to check it out for yourselves. I see he is now in the green room, and we're ready to get things connected. We're 25 seconds out, so we'll rejoin the radio and bring Dr. Lott on, and we'll get things started here. We're also going to talk to Dr. Lott about a bet. He threw out a bet to a bunch of academics. He put real American dollars on the table and said, I will bet you X will happen. And nobody wanted to take him up on it. That was we're going to talk about that as well. All right, here we go. The Michael Dukes Show. Common sense, liberty-based, free thinking radio.
What the hell is an assault weapon?
You know, if we could just figure out how to get all of the murder guns and the attack guns and not keep selling those to people and just sell protection guns, I think that would be great and solve a lot of problems.
Does this mean that if we hurt your feelings, you'd consider the Michael Dukes Show assault radio? Okay, we can live with that. Here's Michael Dukes.
That's right. I only get protection guns. I only get protection guns and defensive guns, not murder guns. Dr. John Lott is the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. He is also the author of the book War on Guns, More Guns, Less Crime, and many others. He joined us this morning to talk about his latest piece. Well, it's not maybe his latest piece, but it's in Real Clear Investigations. The title of the article is Murder They Spun. Selective Stats Leave Suspicious Fingerprints all over the crime debate. And Dr. Lott, of course, is an academic, a statistician, and somebody who kind of came into the whole gun control debate with eyes wide open, just from a purely academic standpoint, and has since over the years become an advocate for true numbers in gun reporting and everything else, and has basically talked about a lot about how the bias is slipping into everything when it comes to guns. He joins us this morning to discuss this and so much more. Dr. Lott, good morning, my friend. How are you?
It's great to talk to you again. Thanks for having me on.
Well, it's good to have you on. Thank you so much. I've been wanting to do this for a while, especially after seeing this article. Because again, just for folks who haven't listened to the program before, haven't seen our interviews before, I mean, you originally, when you first started looking at gun crimes, gun control numbers, and everything else, when you wrote that first book, More Guns, Less Crime, you had no dog in the fight, right? I mean, you were just an academic who was looking at it from a statistical standpoint, but slowly but surely you've been swayed in one direction. Can you give us a little bit of background just for folks who've never seen you or heard of you or haven't heard this story?
Yeah, well, sure. I mean, I was probably in the middle of the gun control debate. I didn't really have particularly strong feelings one way or the other. I'd done a lot of research on crime. I'd been chief economist at the U.S. Sentencing Commission in Washington, but it's not something that I had looked at. There were lots of other issues on crime that I was more interested in. And I was teaching a class at the Wharton Business School, and I made the mistake of telling the students that I was ahead in the syllabus. And I had a couple students come up to me after class, and they said that they knew it wasn't quite on the topic there, but if I could, if I had the extra time, could I go and look at gun control a little bit? And I said, well, I guess I could do that. And it kind of forced me to have to go through more of the academic literature on gun control. And I have to say, it was incredibly poorly done. Very small studies, picking like 31 counties from across the United States. I don't know how you pick 31 counties out of 3,140 counties. And when you're an academic, you do a paper for one of two reasons. Either one, you have a new idea, which is like 95% of the papers that I did, or because you simply think you can do a better job, and which was this case. And I have to confess, there was about 6 times while I was working through that original paper that I got bored and almost stopped doing it. But I ended up finishing it, and I got a call from a reporter named Dennis Couchon at USA Today, who I'd gotten to know when I was chief economist at the U.S. Sentencing Commission. And he would call me up every 6 months or 8 months and ask me some questions. And so he called me up and asked me his questions. And at the end of the discussion, he says, "Oh, by the way, what are you working on?" And I told him. And he said, "Well, that sounds interesting. Why don't I send him a copy of it?" So I did. And then about a week later, it was on the front page of USA Today, and we were kind of off to the races after that.
Yeah, no, it was you made quite a splash in the market, and since then, from someone who really had no dog in the fight, no interest in it, you have come to become you've become a voice for really for accuracy and reporting, and an advocate for I guess an advocate for guns, and the fact that there is I guess a movement out there to spin it. And this article kind of touches on that, because you talk about in this article, all the gun violence statistics, all the headlines that we're reading, and all these other kind of things that they're not necessarily truthful. I mean, they don't hold true to you're a numbers guy, you're a statistician. They do not hold true to the numbers, or they're being spun in a certain way. So walk us through this article and some of the things that you're talking about here.
Yeah. Well, just one comment first before I get into that, and that is, I'm not a gun advocate. I'm a safety advocate. What got me into this debate and what keeps me involved in it is simply trying to figure out what makes people safer. And one reason why I've kind of stayed in this debate is that I've been involved in a lot of academic debates, but on the gun control issue, I don't think I've ever seen so much misinformation as you see consistently from the media and from government and others on the gun issue. I just had a piece yesterday at Real Clear Politics that people can find on our website at crimeresearch.org that goes through and talks about misleading crime data from the FBI, for example. But look, the piece that you're talking about, which is a little bit older, one of the claims that's been made a lot this year is that Republican states have higher murder rates than Democratic states. And they go and they look at the data for 2020. It's basically a claim that California Governor Gavin Newsom originally made at the beginning of the year. And there have been lots of fact checkers and others who say, yeah, no, he's completely right on this. There are a couple problems with it. One is, it's true for the year 2020, the murder rate is higher in Republican states than Democratic states. But if they had looked one more year and this data was out for 2021 when the claims were being made, the reverse is true. The murder rate's actually higher in Democrat states than Republican states. And you would think, when people were doing the fact checks, somebody must have at least looked to see what the most recent data was, since it was out at the time when Newsom was making his claim. In fact, it was out months before Newsom was making his claim. But there's a more important objection, I think, and that is law enforcement dealing with crime is overwhelming a local issue. Decisions about policing are made locally. It's not just the budget for police, but the police procedures are made locally. You have district attorneys are virtually always elected locally. Judges are virtually always elected locally across the country. So the decisions of who to prosecute and the decisions of what penalties to impose on people are all local decisions that are being made there. And so, while at the state level, you'll have kind of what the possible prison term range can be, but that's usually pretty large. They could say 1 to 5 years or something. Whether you arrest somebody, whether you charge them, whether you convict them, and what penalty you impose are all local issues that are there. And so I would go and argue it's overwhelmingly a local issue. And if you look at county data, what happens is that even in 2020, the entire high rate of murders in Republican states are driven by the few large Democratic counties in those states. The Republican counties in those states have very low murder rates, and the reason why the Republican states have higher murder rates is that the Democratic counties in those states have extremely high murder rates in those years. So I'll give you a couple examples. You have Louisiana is a very Republican state, and the murder rate as a whole in the state is high. But the reason why it's high is because you have Orleans Parish has a murder rate of about 50 per 100,000. You take Missouri. Missouri, I think, has a murder rate of about 15 per 100,000. But the reason why that's up there is that you have a couple places, mainly St. Louis and Kansas City areas, which have very high murder rates. In St. Louis, the murder rate, again, is about 50 per 100,000. And so that goes and drives up the rate for the state as a whole, because you not only have a lot of people living there, but you have the extremely high murder rates that are there.
Yeah, so I mean, this is again a story of more and more, what we see more and more, which is selective use of the facts, where they use the one fact without diving down into it. Oh, the red state has the problem, but they're not saying that the whole reason that the red state has the problem is the skewed numbers coming out of the blue segment of the red state, kind of thing. And we see that time and time and time again. Patton said, George Patton said, decision making is easy once you have all the facts. But you point out in this article that we can't even get all the facts. You mentioned specifically that police agencies who are reporting on this stuff, and you're talking about this, I think, also in your news story about the FBI data, 7,000 police agencies account for about 35% of the U.S. population, and they didn't even report crime data to the FBI. I mean, we got a reporting issue, so we can't even get all the stats and statistics that you need to use. So whatever we're seeing is really kind of an incomplete picture of what's going on.
Well, that problem really started in 2021. The data that was reported in 2022, but it was data for 2021. That's where you begin to see all these places like Los Angeles and New York are two places that didn't report their crime data to the FBI. So you can see, and there are lots of other jurisdictions in California, for example, and New York, and other places, usually fairly heavy Democratic areas, that stopped reporting their crime data for 2021 and 2022 to the FBI. So, you're right. It's a lot of the crime data we've had over the last couple of years has been problematic, and I think probably underestimated the increase that we've seen in violent crime over the last couple of years.
I mean, this really hurts the overall discussion about this kind of stuff, because you say the generalizations shape a lot of the public debate that's going on. All these numbers and data feed into the public debate, but when we don't have much of the information, it's frustrating. And then on top of that, anti-gun organizations, gun control groups, they have a tendency to generalize. We're always seeing, when it comes to death rates by firearms, they lump that in with gun violence. Something like 65 to 70% of those gun violence deaths are actually suicides. So it skews the numbers even more. So we can't have an honest conversation about that.
Right. Yeah, but if you add murders, suicides, and accidental deaths together for guns, you find that suicides make up about 70% of that total. Look, I mean, and we see this lots of times. The type of claim is that guns are the leading cause of death for children or something. There are many issues with that. I mean, just purely as a numbers one, if you look at for under 18, so minors, in fact, what you find is that motor vehicle deaths are higher. And for 2019 and 2020, suffocation deaths are higher. If you add homicides, accidental deaths, and suicides together. If you look at murders, in fact, suffocations are higher even for 2021, the last year that we have that type of data for. And so, so that's one basic problem. But the other basic problem is, and I think this is kind of what you're getting at with the suicide discussion, but it's broader than that, and that is the impression is if we could just get rid of guns, then we'll save all these lives. The problem is that we've banned guns in different parts of the country, Chicago and Washington, D.C. Firearm suicides fell, but total suicides didn't fall. And you see that in other places around the world. Countries that have banned either all guns or all handguns may have seen firearm suicides falling, but total suicides don't change. And so the point is that, it seems to me we care about total deaths, not whether deaths involve just firearms. And if people merely change how they commit suicide, and so you have the same total number of suicides, it doesn't seem like that's really much of a gain that you've gotten there, if anything. And
Right.
then you also have the issue of murders. The implication is, well, if we just get rid of the guns, then these murders won't occur. Well, we've tried getting rid of guns. We've tried banning guns in places like Chicago and Washington, D.C., as I say. And what happened to murders? Murders went up. In fact, every place in the world that you've seen either a ban on all guns or all handguns has seen an increase in total murders. And so, if anything,
we just lost the audio for a second here, but that's an appropriate time to take a break. Dr. John Lott is our guest, the Crime Prevention Research Center. We're going to find him at crimeresearch.org. When we come back, we're going to talk about the news media's part in all this because of the reporting and some of the things. Dr. Lott has had some things to say in the past about how the news media covers and reports this kind of stuff. And we're also going to talk a little bit about his bet. I just had to chuckle at this. This is some older news, but I had only seen the story just a couple of days ago. Dr. John Lott asked some academics to put their money where their mouth is, and nobody really wanted to do it. So we're going to talk about that here in just a minute. Dr. John Lott, our guest, The Michael Duke Show, common sense, liberty-based, free-thinking radio.
Running on 100% pure beard power. Oh, also some coffee. We dip our beard in coffee.
Ha, nice beard.
The Michael Duke Show.
Okay, Dr. John Lott is our guest, Crime Prevention Research Center, crimeresearch.org. If you want to put it out there, Dr. Lott is working on his phone right now and his audio, trying to get things squared away. I can hear him now, so we'll get him back on here in just a second.
yeah, I'm here.
Oh, there you are. Okay, I lost your video there, so I can hear your audio, but I can't see your video. So you've turned your camera off, I think. There we go. Okay. Randy asked an interesting question, and this is actually interesting for a couple reasons. Randy asked the question: What are some of the biggest Republican-controlled cities, and what is the murder rate in those cities? Although he calls it M rate. He says, "Facebook doesn't allow me to fully spell out the word murder," which I mean, wow, that's a there's a little piece for your censorship right there. But you're talking specifically about the Democratic cities holding sway and causing the bell curve to go way up. Are there Republican-controlled cities? Do they overall do they have a lower rate, or what's your data show?
Yeah, I mean, if you go to our website, I mean, it's an older piece, so I don't have it memorized because it's a couple months ago. But if you go to our website, we have some discussion about that. Fort Worth is a Republican city-controlled city. You have some other ones that are there that are large, and they have relatively low murder and violent crime rates. But if you go to crimeresearch.org, and this is a piece that I had for Real Clear Investigations, you'll see we break it down by counties that are over 100,000 in population to make comparisons, as well as just all counties.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. You had one little piece in this latest piece or the piece that I'm talking about, which is back from July in Real Clear Investigations. You say breaking out large counties with over 100,000 people, which is where 88% of the murders in the United States occur. So it's in these these larger counties of 100,000 or more where the majority of this stuff takes place, which is just, I mean, it kind of speaks to the whole thing of, if I guess you're safer in the rural area than you are any place where there's 100,000 people or more.
Well, if you look at it, the 2% of the counties in the United States account for about 56% of the murders. They account for about 23% of the population, but 56% of the murders. If you look at the top 5% of the worst counties, so the top 2% of the worst counties, it's about 60 counties. The 5% worse is going to be about 120 counties or so. And what you find is they make up about 75% of the murders. So murders in the United States are concentrated in a relatively small number of counties. But even more than that, even within those counties, it's very heavily concentrated in tiny areas. In the 2% of the worst counties, almost 2/3 of their murders take place within 10-block areas within those counties. So it's very heavily concentrated.
I mean, again, that's the statistics that you're not hearing from the mainstream media or from some of the talking heads that are talking about how gun control is going to save us all and that kind of stuff. And that comes back to what we're going to jump back into when we get back, which is the coverage and the media's component of this, what they're doing. You've had some pretty harsh words for them, so we're going to get to that here in just a second. What are you working on? Can you give us a brief description of this latest article? I haven't had a chance to read it. It came out yesterday. I didn't see it. The FBI, does it kind of correlate with what's going on here, the active shooter incidents?
I don't know what you mean by correlate there, but look, the issue there is just whether they're accurately putting the data out. And unfortunately, I think people have had a lot of discussions about the political biases at the FBI and the Department of Justice. And unfortunately, it's not just in terms of who they arrest or prosecute or spy on. It's also in terms of the crime data that they put out. And there's some real problems there. If you look at the 9 years from 2014 to 2019, the FBI claims that of 302 active shooting cases, only 14 of those were stopped by law-abiding citizens legally carrying permit concealed handguns. And so that's about 4.6% of the total. People don't need to take my word for it. We've gone through and collected these cases. They're on our website at crimeresearch.org. But what we've indicate that there are actually about 150 of these cases.
All right. Hold on, Dr. Lott. Hold on. We're about to rejoin. Let's get to it. The Michael Duke Show. All right, we're back now, continuing our discussion with Dr. John Lott, author of the book War on Guns, More Guns, Less Crime. He's the president of the Crime Prevention Research Center. You can find them at crimeresearch.org. He's always got some great pieces up there, lots of great data that you can peruse through on their website. Again, a statistician looking at the issue of guns and gun violence and gun crime across the country. Right before we went to break, we were just talking about, Dr. Lott has had some strong words for the media in the past, specifically in how they frame arguments or how they place things. And I know a couple times, I think it's probably the second or third time ago when we had him on the program, he specifically was talking about how this is feeding into that problem of the perception, I guess, the perception problem with people and guns. Dr. Lott, are you still, does the news media play a big part in that? What is your main concern with the way that reporting is going for these various crimes and what's being reported in the media with gun violence and the statistics and numbers that we're seeing?
Well, the media has a lot of impacts on people's perceptions about the benefits and costs of guns. They do it in terms of how they cover defensive gun uses versus gun crimes. So, for example, we did a deep dive a couple years ago looking at all the news stories across the country in terms of defensive gun uses. If you look at the 5 largest newspapers, for example, Wall Street Journal, USA Today, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, Washington Post, you'll find that they had about over 2,700 news stories about gun crimes. By contrast, they had only 10 stories about defensive gun uses, and most of their stories had something go wrong. The problem is that in reality, we find that people use guns defensively about 5 times more frequently to stop crime than used to commit crime. But if you just rely on what's in the newspapers and stuff, you think people almost never use guns to stop crime, and when they do, something goes wrong, and yet there's lots of gun crime that occurs. And the problem is, partly it's just an issue of what's newsworthy, doesn't necessarily reflect reality. So about 95% of the time, simply brandishing a gun is sufficient to cause a criminal to stop an attack. And so if you have a situation where, let's say, a woman brandishes a gun, the would-be criminal runs away, no shots fired, no dead body on the ground, you're not even sure what crime was committed, versus another news story where you have a dead body on the ground. I think you or I or anybody who is an editor of a newspaper or a news outlet at the time would think that the second story, the dead body on the ground, is a lot more newsworthy than the case where the woman used the gun defensively and you're not even sure what crime would have been committed. We care about both from a policy perspective, but in terms of what's newsworthy, we can understand why 95% of the news stories just aren't considered newsworthy and don't get covered. And then you also have other issues, such as the fact that people only report about 22% of violent crimes to the police, and the media doesn't even cover all of those. And so, and the police don't record systematically things like defensive gun uses. So it's not too surprising that, what gets covered by the news media is just really a fraction of what happens in terms of crime or in terms of defensive gun uses that are there. Yeah. But there are lots of other problems that occur with the media, and I've been writing about that recently too on our website at crimeresearch.org. And that has to do with how the media covers things like these mass public shooting diaries and manifestos that are left. Just in the last couple of weeks, Everytown, one of Michael Bloomberg's many gun control groups, has had a lawsuit dealing with the Buffalo mass murderer from last year. They're suing the small gun store in New York that sold him the gun, even though they properly did the background check on him. They're suing his parents for being responsible. They're suing social media for supposedly radicalizing him with right-wing propaganda. The problem is that not only Everytown, but the news media generally doesn't seem to want to carefully read this murderer's manifesto. Because if they did, one thing that they would realize is that what's responsible is the gun-free zone. This guy spends a lot of time explaining why he picked the target that he did. And his number one explanation for it is he wanted to go to a place where he knew his victims weren't going to be able to go and defend themselves. He wanted to get media. And he knows that the more people he kills, the more media attention he's going to get. And he knows if he goes to a place where his victims aren't able to go and defend themselves, he's going to get even more media attention.
Right.
But, Everytown and the media generally refuse to talk about that. The media coverage of Everytown's lawsuit, for example, and talking about the parents, one of the things that they ignore there is that this murderer had actually seen two psychiatrists prior to doing his attack, and both those psychiatrists had said that the person wasn't a danger to himself or others. So if two mental health care experts are supposed to, say he's okay, why are you suing the parents who he's not even living with at the time?
Right.
For that. But, I suppose another thing that really gets to the media bias is talking about this guy's motivations. Yes, he was a racist. Yes, he was a white supremacist. But if you read the editorials in the New York Times or the Washington Post, and the New York Times has probably had like 8 editorials in the last year about this guy because he's been Exhibit A for them showing, the dangers of right-wing white supremacists. They classified him as a right-winger. They classify anybody who's a racist as a conservative and a right-winger. The problem is, if you actually read the guy's manifesto over and over again, he explains why he's a white supremacist. He calls himself an eco-fascist. He calls himself a socialist. He calls himself somebody who is a mild-mannered authoritarian leftist.
Right.
Maybe you have a lot of conservative friends who call themselves authoritarian leftists. Maybe you have a lot of conservative friends who call themselves socialists or whatever, but it's kind of not the people that I know very well.
Yeah, exactly. It's the same thing. Dr. John Lott, our guest. We're running out of time, Dr. Lott. Crimeresearch.org. I'm going to ask the doctor to hang with us for just a minute to talk about the bet. If you want to hear about that, you'll have to listen on the podcast because it's going to take place over the top of the hour. We got more coming up. Reason Magazine's JD2 Chili in hour 2, plus Willie Waffle, The Michael Duke Show, Common Sense Radio. Back with more after this. I just don't know how they can get away with that, Dr. Lott, where it's very clear in his manifesto, he says he's a eco-fascist, he says he's a leftist, and yet they continue to just lump it in like, oh, because he's racist, he's right-wing. There are racists of every stripe out there, and it just blows my mind. And onto the gun-free zone thing, you're talking about the Buffalo. It just came out yesterday or day before that this Jacksonville shooting that just took place, that dollar store that guy got to was the 3rd location. He turned away from 2 other locations because he was confronted by armed security at one point.
We have that on our website. We put that the day that it occurred. I know. And in the North Carolina case, it was also a gun-free zone that he had tried to attack. But in Florida, the historically black college that his first target was you know, that it was also a place where civilians were banned from being able to go and have guns.
Yeah.
The other thing that's not mentioned much in the news media is that in North Carolina, the murderer there um, was um, was a non-immigrant alien. He was here on a student visa, and unless under certain exceptional circumstances, which I don't think he fulfilled, he was banned from having either guns or ammunition. And yet he obtained a gun. In Florida, there are conflicting news stories, but some of the news stories say that he had been involuntarily committed to a mental hospital. And if so, he would have been banned from having guns then too. And so, you know, here you have two attacks that got a lot of attention that had targeted gun-free zones, and where civilians were banned from having guns, where at least one and maybe both of these individuals, it was illegal for them to have guns to begin with. And yet, you know, you had these attacks
Right.
that occurred.
I want to, before we run out of time, I want to talk about this bet really quick because I was laughing so hard. You actually made a bet. You put out an email to 12 different academics challenging them on the issues resulting in Brazil, because Bolsonaro in Brazil had lightened the gun laws there. There'd been a 600% increase in gun ownership, and then the new authoritarian president had come in, and you'd made a bet with 12 different academics as to which way the gun violence, the homicide rate was going to go. You said $1,000 if it goes up to you, to them, and yet when it all turned out, nobody wanted to take you up on this, and in fact, they wanted to waffle on it. I thought this was has anybody ever responded? The article I read was a couple months old, so has anybody taken you up on your offer of that $1,000 bet on which way gun control was going to go?
Nobody took me up on my bet. I had reached out to a 13th academic, and he never responded. Most of those guys, I think like 8 of the 13 never responded despite multiple requests there. One guy did say he would do a bet, but it was like completely different, and it was a mess. And he wouldn't explain why he wanted to make any changes and what I'd offer. But everybody else either refused to respond or responded and said no, that they weren't interested in doing it. And, you know, the amazing thing is these guys have no problems going to the media constantly and making predictions about what's going to happen with different types of gun control laws. Here you had a very stark changes, the 600% increase in gun ownership, and then a ban on gun sales, a ban on ammunition, a ban on concealed carry, and moves towards dramatically changing the licensing rules to take away the licenses from many people who had guns. And you don't usually find that type of dramatic swings in such a short period of time here. And I thought it was kind of a perfect time for a bet. I mean, some of these academics would be claiming that each 1% increase in gun ownership would be associated with a 0.6% increase in homicides. Well, that's a pretty bold prediction. You have over 600% increase in gun ownership. There should have been a 360% or more increase in homicides. And yet the homicide rate fell by 34% under Bolsonaro. And, you know, this ban on guns and taking away gun sales and taking away existing guns, you would think these guys would be willing to put some money where their mouths are on these predictions. And I wanted to do it in a way that would memorialize it so that they would be held accountable, because too often afterwards people come up with rationalizations for why things didn't work out the way they thought they would.
Yeah. Dr. John Lott is our guest, the Crime Prevention Research Center. If you'd like to donate and help Dr. Lott with his work, you can go to crimeresearch.org/donate. He doesn't take any money from the NRA or GOA or any of the other organizations. It's simple people like us who are helping fund his research and his policies and his writings. Dr. Lott, as always, my friend, it's great to talk with you. Thank you so much for being part of it today. We look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks very much. Take care, Michael.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.